If you're thinking about making a Ford Bronco your next SUV, then this video is for you. I'm not just going to be talking about this Everglades trim right next to me, I'm going to be talking about the entire Bronco lineup, why you might want to choose specific options and specific trims, and of course, how the Bronco compares against the direct competition in the US, most notably the Wrangler and of course the Toyota 4Runner. When considering the Bronco, the first thing you need to do is decide whether you want the two-door or the four-door version. If you're interested in a two-door SUV because of its tidier off-road dimensions, it's going to be shorter, it's going to have better breakover angles, etc., you don't have too many options in the US. You basically have the Land Rover Defender, which has resurrected itself as a unibody SUV with an independent suspension, or you have the Bronco and the Wrangler. But there's a bit of differentiation between these two. The Wrangler also has a two-door and a four-door version, but all models are going to have a solid front axle. This is going to have an independent front suspension in all versions, solid axle in the rear. However, if you want a Bronco and you want a solid front axle, you could do an aftermarket swap. There are a bunch of companies out there that are now offering that feature. And because this is a body-on-frame vehicle, it's going to be easier to adapt that solid front axle to the front end. Now, why might you want the short version? Obviously, it's about off-roading dimensions, because the Bronco has grown generation over generation, and it is now over 190 inches long in its longest format, of course, including the spare tire on the back. That makes this longer than a 1992 Tahoe two-door or a 1990s Jeep Grand Cherokee. Both of them are actually a little bit smaller than this. And in fact, the original Bronco that you might be waxing poetic over, it was significantly smaller than even the two-door version. It was only 151 inches long, so maybe right around here. It was actually about as long as a current generation Mini Cooper. Now, the two-door version of the Bronco shrinks things down to 174.8 inches long, so maybe somewhere right around here, and it does that by moving the rear tire forward. It loses the middle seat because the second row is actually in between the two rear tires, and as a result, dimensions shrink considerably on the inside. Much like the Ford truck lineup, there are practically a million different variations of Bronco available. Not just the two different lengths, but multiple engine options, axle options, two different transmission options, four different suspension options, not to mention wheel and tire packages, interior option combinations, and upholstery, etc. The result is that selecting a Bronco may seem like a daunting process, not to mention the order process itself, because the Bronco is so hot, getting your hands on one, especially the exact one you might want, can be a little bit tricky. You may have to be flexible on which Bronco you're willing to accept, or you may have to be willing to wait quite some time to get the exact Bronco you want. And personally, that's what I would recommend if you have the time to wait, because there are so many different ways to customize this. If you want that really unique model, you may need to just wait. While we're back here, let's talk about the Bronco itself. We have a fifth door in the back rather than a hatch. I do find that practical as far as loading cargo in and out, but keep in mind that in parallel parking situations that can be a bit of a pain. This model has the hard top, so we have a glass upper right there, and it has a slide out cargo tray to help you load things in the back a little bit more easily, or of course use as a food preparation shelf if you're camping, things like that. And in case you're wondering, it can also be used as a tailgating seat. This is a really handy feature, but it does take up a bit of cargo capacity because the entire module is about 2 inches high. And since a lot of you on Facebook asked, it's not plastic, it is a metal shelf. Some features you'll find on the Bronco but not on the 4Runner include removable doors, and Ford has a really novel solution to what we see in the Wrangler lineup with the side view mirrors. They're actually mounted to the cowling right here rather than the door, so you don't have to take them off and insert them into a tiny holder. We also have removable roof sections. You can get either a hard top or a soft top roof, or a partial hard top, partial soft top, where this front section is soft and then we have a hard top behind. Personally, I prefer the hard top because I feel a bit more secure about using load bars on top of the vehicle with a hard top rather than a soft top, although I have seen people do that particular combination, soft top with the load bars on top as well. There are a ton of different aftermarket tops as well, so if you're looking for more of a bikini top or something like that, you can get that in your Bronco as well. But no matter what you do, this vehicle was not designed from the factory to have the windshield fold down like you do find in the Wrangler. I find the fold-down windshield to be more of a novelty than a useful feature because I certainly wouldn't use it on the highway when a rock could just go flying right through the vehicle. A feature that I do like and would use more often, however, are these cargo tie-downs well integrated to either side of the hood. Whether you're tying a kayak or a Christmas tree to your vehicle, this is a really handy touch, and it has a rated capacity of 150 pounds. If you're considering buying a Bronco off the dealer lot, but it's not quite the trim you were interested in, keep in mind that a lot of what we see on this Everglades trim can be added to any version of the Bronco. Really, the hard and fast things you should be more focused on are what's going on under the hood, because we're going to talk about that in a bit. There are 3 different engines on offer. You might want to consider the axle ratios that you really want, etc. Features like this 10,000-pound Warren winch with the 100-pound synthetic leader, these can be added at any time, as could the bumper that's on this model. This is the modular off-road bumper. It's a feature I really like, but if you don't find one on the Bronco you're interested in, you could just bolt this on. Also part of the Everglades trim is the factory snorkel, and Ford does call it a snorkel rather than a desert air intake like some manufacturers do. Now, this is not meant to improve your water fording capability. The Everglades does have improved water fording capability, but that's because of raised vents for the transfer case, the axles, and the transmission. I like the well-integrated look of the snorkel, but there is something you should keep in mind. The snorkel itself doesn't really create much wind noise, but because of its profile, it causes buffeting right around here. So it constantly sounds like this window is down when you're driving about 70 miles an hour on the freeway, and that's simply due to the way the seals are working right here with the window and the door opening. So if you're not a fan of loud noises on the highway, you might want to skip it. Below the spare tire, we find a 2-inch receiver and a 4-pin and a 7-pin wiring harness connection. But if you plan on towing heavier loads, you're going to have to look towards the Ford Ranger. The 2-door version of the Bronco tops out at 3,500 pounds maximum, the 4-door at 4,500 pounds maximum, but only if you choose the 3-liter twin-turbo Raptor. All the other versions of the 4-door, with either the 2.3 or the 2.7, they still top out at 3,500 pounds. And your exact Bronco may actually see reduced towing numbers because of the options that you've put on it. This particular Bronco, for instance, only has 915 pounds of payload capability. So if you put you, me, and all of our camping gear in the back, you might not have any payload left for tongue weight, which means you wouldn't be able to tow anything at all. Ground clearance and calm water fording capability will vary based on the trim level you select. Most versions of the Bronco will range from about 8.3 inches up to about 11.7 inches of clearance. Obviously, you could lift it yourself aftermarket as well. If you get the Raptor, that's going to give you the most clearance at 13.1, but that is, of course, the most expensive model as well. Once you've decided on 2-door versus 4-door, the next most critical thing to nail down is which engine you want under the hood. There are 3 different engines on offer. Of course, the top-end 3-liter twin-turbo engine is reserved for the Raptor, so if you want that one, be prepared to shell out big because the Raptor is also the most expensive Bronco. Most versions are going to have either this engine or the optional 2.7. This is basically the same 2.3-liter turbo that we find out of the Ford Ranger. Under here, it produces 300 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque if you feed it premium unleaded. If you feed it regular unleaded, you'll get 275 horsepower, 315 pound-feet of torque. Now, this is not an on-off switch kind of power output level. The engine doesn't know what kind of fuel you have fed it. So if it's 39 degrees where you are, like it is where I am right now, then even on regular unleaded, you're probably going to be getting 300 horsepower out of it. But if you're in the desert at 120 degrees, you're going to need the premium fuel in order to get that max power. Basically, the same thing is going on with the 2.7-liter twin-turbo 6. It'll produce 330 horsepower, 415 pound-feet of torque with premium, and a little bit less if you choose regular unleaded. The 3-liter twin-turbo for 418 horsepower, that's rated only to operate on premium, although it does appear that it will operate safely on regular. Now, I'm still waiting for official confirmation from Ford on that, but the vast majority of engines in the United States will operate safely on regular. They just won't achieve their maximum power output. But it is interesting that Ford does not have a rated power output on regular for that 3-liter twin-turbo. The next thing you need to do is decide which transmission you want, because if you want a manual transmission, that's really going to narrow down the number of trims that you can select from. For instance, this Everglades trim, for some reason you cannot get the manual transmission with the 2.3-liter turbo, but you can do that on other trims. If you want the manual transmission and you want features like this winch up front, the badges, etc., you could upgrade your whatever trim to have those options and, of course, have the manual transmission, so keep that in mind. I think I would get the 10-speed automatic, however, because this is an excellent transmission. It's going to be faster 0 to 60, and generally speaking, with off-roading, it's going to be a little bit easier to maintain your speed. This particular model also has a 67.8 to 1 crawl ratio, which is pretty darn good for this segment. It's not as bonkers insane as some of the nearly 100 to 1 ratios out there, but it is certainly very, very good for an engine with this much torque. You should also decide right from the beginning whether you want the lockers in the Bronco, especially if you want the front locker. You could obviously add in some mechanical lockers aftermarket, but they're not going to be as easy to deal with as the electronically actuated lockers that you find from the factory. This is one of the few vehicles in North America that is available with a front locking differential. This is a true locking front differential, not a brake-based system like we find in the 4Runner. The 4Runner only has a locker available in the rear. Up front, it's only going to be using the brakes to send power left and right. You're not going to need it all the time, but when you need it, you'll be really glad that you have it, because it could mean the difference between using the winch in the mud or just pressing a button inside and getting out of the mud. Of course, this is the kind of vehicle that could go a lot further in the mud, because not only do you have the lockers, you also have a lot of torque and you have the 10,000-pound winch. If, however, you're really considering mud bogging, you might want to get something with the 2.7-liter turbo rather than the 2.3, because it takes that torque level all the way up to 415 pound-feet of torque. That's really going to be important if you want the bigger tires. Speaking of tires, these are the factory 35-inch Goodyears. The Bronco was designed from the very beginning to accommodate these tires and even larger ones right from the very beginning. That's part of why we have the turbocharged engine under the hood, because it produces a lot of torque and a lot of low-end torque. That's really critical when you start talking about bigger diameter tires because of the mechanical disadvantages, I guess you could say. And that's exactly why over in the Wrangler lineup, Jeep decided to put the diesel in the vehicle, and then of course ultimately the 6.4-liter V8 as well, because they needed extra torque to compete with these big tire Broncos. Ford offers 4 different suspensions in the Bronco. This is an area that is going to be easier to modify yourself if you can't find the exact Bronco you want on the dealer lot. The biggest change between the 4 different suspension tunes is the damper setup, although there are a few other suspension tweaks as you work your way on up from Haas 1.0 to Haas 4.0. Haas 1 is the base suspension, Haas 2 adds Bilstein dampers, Haas 3 adds Fox internal bypass dampers, and Haas 4 takes you up to the Premier Fox damper, which is a live valve 3.1 semi-active setup. But if you want to make some of those changes yourself aftermarket because you can only find a specific trim and it has Haas 2.0 and you want Haas 3.0, you could make those changes yourself. Just like you could bolt on skid plates, you could add extra fender flares, etc. Although technically possible to swap, I would say you should also decide on what kind of seats you want in your Bronco. Do you want the power seats? Do you want the manual seats? I do find the power seats to be more comfortable than what's in this model. It does have a manual adjustable lumbar support, and it is a tilt, slide, and height adjustable seat as well, but you cannot adjust the seat bottom for its tilt. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion, and generally speaking, these front seats are more comfortable than the comparable seats we find in the Wrangler. They're also certainly more padded. The Bronco might be bigger on the outside than an Escape, but in terms of combined legroom, it's really not far off. With this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have maybe about 3.5 inches of legroom left. The rear bench is a little bit wider feeling than some, but when you really start looking at exactly where the seats are positioned, you'll notice it's about the same width as a compact crossover. Scooting all the way over here to the right side, this seat's all the way back at its track, suitable for a 6'5" passenger I had in the vehicle. My knees are definitely digging into the seat back. Headroom is pretty generous in this model with the hard top roof. I have about 1.5 inches left, but if you're looking for even more comfortable rear seat accommodations, you're probably going to want to look at one of Ford's larger SUVs. Technically, these rear seats recline, but they really only move about 3/4 inch. They do, however, fold flat into the floor, and if I move this headrest over here, you'll see how that works. Almost flat with the cargo area in the back. Now keep in mind that this particular model has that sliding shelf, so the cargo area is a little bit higher than normal. When it comes to cargo hauling, a big advantage of the Bronco, whether we're talking about the 2-door or the 4-door model, is the squareness of the cargo area. Not just the opening, but also this hatch and door combo right here. It's very, very vertical, and the entire area is very square. You'll get 35.6 cubic feet of storage space in the 4-door model, a little bit less if you choose the Raptor because of the different bars in the back, 22.4 if you choose the 2-door version, because most of the shrink happens back here in the cargo area for that shorter wheelbase model. But either version is arguably going to be more practical than a wide variety of compact crossovers, especially if you're willing to fold down the second row seats, because you could put a much bigger boxier item in here with or without the second row seats folded than you could in the average compact crossover, like a RAV4, a CR-V, or Ford's own Escape. In fact, even versus something like a Ford Edge, you could probably put a bigger boxier item in here than you'd be able to squeeze in that Edge and still close its hatch. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that a lot of this is going to apply to the regular Bronco model, not just the Everglades trim I'm in right now. I love this row of auxiliary switches just above the rear view mirror. Not only is this a good place to put them, but they also have a really nice feel to them, and they're illuminated, which is a touch that I like. Now, this particular model has the hardtop roof. You can see the latches right there, but you notice there's not a lot of sound deadening going on. This is just the injection molded surface of those tops. To make removal easier, the roof is designed in several sections. This is just over the passenger seat. This one is over the driver's seat. We then have a larger panel over the second row of seats, and then you can see the rest of the roof right there behind. Moving around to the headrests and the shoulder belts, we find a height adjustable design for the driver and front passenger and two-way adjustable headrests. It's a bit difficult to tell on camera, but this is a two-tone interior. We have a lighter section of upholstery for the center of the seat back and seat bottom cushion, and then darker color for the outboard side right here. Slightly contrasting stitching, not a lot of contrast going on in this particular trim. And then that two-tone theme continues as we move on over to the doors and then on over to the dashboard as well. I really love this center screen. If you're debating between a Wrangler and a Bronco, you should know that this screen is fantastically huge compared to what we find in the Wrangler. That one is awfully small, and this one does feature smartphone integration, and it offers the ability to shrink or expand your CarPlay integration, which is a really nice touch. Other than that, the software itself is very similar to what we find in the rest of Ford's lineup, so it can be a bit sluggish at times, but it is fully featured. In the center of the dashboard above the screen, we have a place where you can mount your GoPro or other cameras. We also find controls for the lockers. This is the front locker, rear locker, and then the trail turn assist button. You can also turn off the traction stability control. There's the hazard light button right there. Then moving below the screen, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control, some infotainment controls there, USB inputs down there, USB-C and USB-A. Also, deep storage area where you can keep your smartphone. Pretty traditional console shifter with manual mode shifts over here on this side. I would rather have paddles on the back of the steering wheel, to be honest. Manual mode down there. This is where we find the GOAT mode controls, as well as the controls for the four-wheel drive system, 4 low, 4 high, 2 high, and then those will automatically change as you engage various drive modes. We have two pretty big cup holders over here, and then this is where we find all the window switches and mirror controls, things like that. This is kind of a rubbery housing so that way dust and dirt doesn't get in there. Ford has done a really good job with that, but I am surprised that these are just pretty traditional switches when they've gone through all the effort of making that a little rubber housing. Over here we have a center armrest that opens to reveal a fairly deep storage area. This is where they have put the manual and the controller for the winch that's mounted on the front. On the driver's side, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster, which combines a physical speedometer with the LCD that you see over here. The PRNDM section down there, that is not part of the LCD. Personally, I found the digital tachometer to be kind of useless, but I did appreciate the digital speedometer because it was much easier to read than the analog speedometer over there on the left. Aside from that, the various views provided to you by this display are pretty similar to the rest of Ford's off-road vehicles. We have pitch and roll displays, power distribution, things like that, and you can expand and contract that data area there on the side. Moving out from there, we have a sort of 3-spoke steering wheel, split bottom spoke right there, controls for the cruise control over here on this side, and then controls for that multifunction LCD and some track forward backward buttons on the other side. Probably the first thing we should do is talk about performance from the 3 different engine options. Obviously, the Raptor is going to be the fastest thanks to its 3-liter turbocharged V6 that's going to get you 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds. Next is the 2.7-liter turbo that's going to get you 0 to 60 in 6.5 in most trims. Keep in mind that there are different axle ratios, different option packages, etc. And this Everglades trim is one of the heaviest versions of the Bronco because of that cargo shelf, the winch, the skid plates, everything, etc. So all of that is going to factor in the 0 to 60 time. And that's probably why this is the slowest version of the Bronco that I've ever tested at 7.2 seconds, 0 to 60. But because this engine has so much low-end torque and the 10-speed automatic transmission has very low starting ratios, this feels an awful lot peppier than that 7.2 seconds would otherwise indicate. I have to admit, I would be pretty torn between the 2.3 and 2.7-liter turbos. The 2.7 is going to be smoother, it's going to feel peppier, it's going to have a lot more low-end torque, so if you want to put bigger tires on your vehicle, if you want to really go crazy, lift it, do a lot of modifications, etc., you probably want the 2.7 over the 2.3, but I think a lot of people, especially a lot of people that might not really think they could handle the 2.3, will be pleasantly surprised with its performance. Most versions of the Bronco, especially the more road-focused versions of the Bronco, will be just fine with the 2.3, and even moderate off-roading is just fine with this engine. If you want to take things to the next level, then again, you might want the extra oomph. Now, as far as stopping distance goes, there is a huge variation based on the tire you choose. A base trim that I was briefly able to test thanks to a local dealer was able to stop from 60 miles an hour to 0 in just 121 feet. The last 2.7 liter turbo that I tested stretched that out to 137 feet. This model came in at 141 feet thanks to the weight, and largely due to the tire size and everything else going on in the Bronco Raptor, that took 160 feet. That is an absolutely massive variation from one trim to another, so definitely keep in mind the impact of the different trim levels, the different tires, and different options that you might want to select. Some will definitely be able to stop before the school bus, and some you will definitely need to make some adjustments to your driving style if you want to make sure you stop before the school bus. As far as handling and suspension refinement, I would choose the Bronco over the Wrangler, primarily due to the independent front suspension. This has been a bit controversial in some circles. Some folks say you should never have an independent front suspension in an off-road vehicle, and some people say it doesn't matter at all. The truth is really in the middle somewhere, because it depends on what you're doing and what you expect out of your off-road vehicle. For the vast majority of shoppers, this is probably going to be the better way to go, because the vast majority of folks drive their Wrangler or their Bronco every day. They commute in it, they off-road on weekends, maybe they off-road monthly, etc. And if you're that kind of occasional off-roader, you're not just off-roading in your vehicle, then an independent suspension is going to make a lot of sense. It's going to be better on-road. It's even going to be better in mild off-road situations like this, where it's simply going to be more comfortable inside. And then, of course, road holding is going to be better. On the other hand, if you're the kind of person that's going to heavily modify your vehicle and take it to an off-road park on a trailer, and that's all that it's ever going to do, then a solid front axle might make more sense. But then it really doesn't become an advantage for the Wrangler, because you're modifying so much else on the Bronco anyway, you might as well just toss a solid front axle on the front. Dimensionally, there are a few things to keep in mind, though. This is a little bit larger on the outside as far as footprint versus the Wrangler, so this does feel larger out on trails like this, where some of the areas are a little bit tight. It doesn't really become a stuck problem. It mainly becomes more of a pinstriping problem. Making sure that you're not just damaging the paint on a vehicle, especially like this one that isn't mine, that's Ford's, can be a bit trickier in this than in the Wrangler, and that's just due to the size of the Bronco. When it comes to the handling and ride score, I'm going to give this Bronco an A on both fronts. The independent front suspension certainly makes this feel more civilized than a Wrangler, and that's something that I really appreciate, because again, most folks are going to be daily driving their off-road vehicle, and that's going to be really important. But I love the fact that even though this has the independent front suspension, it still has lockers front and rear, which we are definitely going to engage now, because I'm going to go over this little rise here with two wheels off the ground. And this is a good demonstration of the capability you get in a system like this and why you might want it. So, of course, we have to be in 4 low there, just engage the front locker. Now everything is locked. The transfer case is locked, rear differential is locked, front differential is locked, lots of ground clearance. So this is going to be absolutely simple. And yep, wheels up in the air, doesn't matter at all. In fact, I'm even going to back up here, because turning radius, that is a little bit of a problem. That one camera's probably taking a look at that hillside. And then in this position, I not only have 2 wheels up in the air, but I'm going to be going over a log with one of the wheels that's on the ground. Absolutely not a problem. That's the benefit to having 2 different lockers in the vehicle, one up front, one in the back, and then of course a true 2-speed transfer case. Now, this engine has so much torque that, honestly, you're really going to be on a very, very aggressive trail before you even need the low ratio mode. I sort of wish that Ford had allowed us to engage the front locker in 4 high. Now, keep in mind that locking differentials, especially a front locker, should only be used in very limited situations where you really need that extra traction. You really need all 4 wheels to be spinning at the exact same rate. That is not the norm, to be honest, when you're driving on any road surface, including the road surface that I'm on here. On this trail surface, it's actually better to not have the rear differential locked, because you don't want to be tearing up the trail. Or at least I don't, because I have to help maintain this trail, and I'm a little bit lazy. So if you're the kind of person that really wants to care for trails, keep in mind the all-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive mode that you should be in for the surface that you're on. In my cabin noise testing, this model came in at 75.5 decibels, making this one of the loudest vehicles that we've ever tested. And most of that wind noise seems to be caused by the snorkel, and it seems to be focused on the window right behind the front passenger seat. This Everglades trim with the 2.3-liter engine has been averaging 14.7 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, so certainly not the most fuel-efficient option in this segment. The 2.7-liter turbo, it has been largely similar in the Broncos that I've tested. Fuel economy is really going to vary more based on options and trim levels you choose rather than engines. So if you get one of the varieties of Bronco that could have either the 2.3 or 2.7, fuel economy is going to be pretty similar. But if you were to compare a more road-focused version of this vehicle with the 2.7, it's probably going to be more efficient than this Everglades trim with the 2.3. Hopefully that makes sense. In some ways, the Bronco is a best of both worlds blends. We have the civility on-road of the independent front suspension like we find in a Toyota 4Runner, but we have the capability of a locking front differential like we find in the Wrangler, with, of course, the added civility of that independent front suspension. And for me, this is the combination that I like best. Now let's run through the 10 different trim levels that are available for 2023. We have the base trim, Big Bend, Black Diamond, Outer Banks, Badlands, Wild Track, Everglades, of course the Raptor, and then we have the two Heritage trims, Heritage and Heritage Limited. There is one important thing to note about the Bronco. It is still really popular. Ford cannot keep up with demand, so you won't really be able to order every version of the Bronco. If you really want one, you're probably going to have to make do with the Bronco that you find on the dealer lot. Let's start off with the basics. Obviously, the Bronco is available in 2-door or 4-door format, and the only trim that is not available as a 2-door is the Raptor, and that's mainly because of its more Baja-style off-road mission. You really need the extra wheelbase for that, so they make that just the 4-door model. Now, because 2-door models don't sell as well as 4-door models, the option packages don't align quite the same. Bronco sales skew heavily towards the 4-door model, which is why there are just a few differences in terms of the lineup. For instance, the 2-door models come with the hardtop standard. You can add on an additional soft top, but you're always going to get the hardtop, whereas on the 4-door model, you can choose hardtop or soft top. And of course, if you choose the right model, you can get hardtop and soft top simultaneously, except for the Raptor, where the hardtop becomes standard. If you're interested in the soft top varieties, there are a number of different Ford soft tops. You could also get some aftermarket tops as well. The one that I would skip is the sort of partial convertible top. It moves just the front part of the roof. That part is canvas. The rest of it is the hard top format. I would get the one that opens completely. The buffeting is a little bit funny for me in the model that just opens the front part unless you're going at really low speeds, but at that point, I think I might want the entire top open. I would probably skip the accessory doors as well. Some of them are kind of expensive, and I think I would just opt for doors on or doors off. Now let's roll through the basic trim lineup. We have the base model, $34,595. That gets you the 2-door version, 16-inch steelies. We do have tow hooks, 8-inch LCD infotainment system, 7-speed manual transmission on that one, and I think it's a really solid value. If you want the 4-door model, it is going to be more expensive at $37,745. Of course, you have to be really lucky because it has been so popular, Ford has stopped orders on the base trim. If you really want an absolute base model, you're going to have to hunt really hard and probably be prepared to pay way more than the MSRP on that particular model. It's really handy that Ford makes the 2.7-liter turbo optional in pretty much every trim, unless, of course, it becomes standard. The 2.7-liter engine is also not terribly expensive as far as options go. It's just $1,895, and it's available on, again, every trim where the 2.7-liter is not standard, obviously excluding the Raptor. Next up, we have the Big Bend trim for $38,585. This has the 17-inch wheels, fog lights. We have an additional mud ruts mode for the GOAT mode system, leather steering wheel, and tinted rear glass. The base model does come across as a little bit more basic. So for a lot of folks, this is probably going to be the realistic base trim. Black Diamond is where we get a rear locker. So if you're really interested in taking your Bronco off-road, you're probably going to want to step up at least to the Black Diamond trim for $41,250. We also get skid plates. We get 7 GOAT modes. Not every Bronco has the same GOAT modes. Some have 6, some have 7, etc. We get 32-inch all-terrain tires on that model. Auxiliary switches become standard, as do the rubber mats and floor drains. That's definitely going to be a big thing for people that want to take their vehicle a little bit more aggressively off-road and be able to clean it out easily. I personally like the Outer Banks trim. It starts at $46,350. It's a little bit more of a style-forward model with a lot of the off-road capabilities. Outer Banks includes the mid-package that's optional in other trims. We also get body-colored fenders, which is probably the thing I like most about it. It definitely gives it a very different look than the rest of the Bronco lineup. We also get the LED signature lights that are not standard in the lower-end trims, cloth seats rather than vinyl, 18-inch wheels versus 17-inch wheels. Some folks might not like that. And we lose one goat mode, so we get just 6 goat modes rather than 7. That is something that does change as you work your way across the lineup. But the big thing is you get the 12-inch LCD infotainment system, which really makes the interior look a little bit more modern than the smaller screen in the dashboard. Although both of those screens were bigger than the ones we found in the Wrangler up until 2024. For 2024, the Wrangler gets a big brand new screen. We then get the Heritage trim, $46,605. This is based on the Big Ben trim with the mid package and Sasquatch. That's why the price tag is a little bit higher. This has a unique two-tone appearance. Regardless of the color you choose, you get a two-tone setup. You can get this with either the hard top or the dual top option, but it's always going to come with the hard top. The 2.7 liter is again optional on this one, but the white wheels are standard. That's definitely going to be a polarizing look for some. The Sasquatch package is available on a variety of different trims of Bronco. We should talk about that a little bit more. It includes a unique suspension tune with increased ride height, different fender flares. We get 35-inch mud terrain tires on that one on 17-inch beadlock capable wheels. The final drive ratio is different in order to help support those larger diameter tires, and we get front and rear lockers as part of the Sasquatch package. I'm a little bit torn on this, but I would generally say that the Sasquatch package is worth it. Depending on the trim you're looking at, the Sasquatch package could be as little as around $4,000 or as much as about $7,500 or so. But when you look at the content that we get on it, the front and rear lockers, the beadlock capable wheels, the upgraded suspension, the upgraded dampers, the heavier duty steering rack, etc., the package does come across as a good deal. It would cost you a lot more to upgrade those components separately than just to get that package from the factory. Then, of course, you could finance the package at a lower interest rate versus doing it yourself aftermarket. The modular bumper is $975. It includes skid plates and bigger tow hooks, but it does delete the fog lights. If you're really planning on doing more rugged off-roading, then this is also a really good deal, but you might really want to choose whether you want the features that we find in the regular bumper, so fog lights, things like that, or whether you want the modular bumper. There's also a winch available in the Everglades trim. We'll get to that in just a little bit. If you want an aftermarket winch and some aftermarket other accessories, you might want to go for an aftermarket bumper as well. So it really is just going to depend on exactly how much modding you want to do after you buy your Bronco. But I would definitely get the auxiliary switch package. That's $195 if it's not included on that particular model. Since the Outer Banks trim is the one that I would probably buy if I were shopping, my configuration ended up at $61,500. That's the 2.7 liter turbo, the Sasquatch package, the Lux package, which has the 12-inch LCD, the adaptive cruise control, additional sound deadening, 360-degree camera, and upgraded audio. Also, the hard top and the modular bumper. Those are options that I would select. I would just skip the soft top myself. Moving along, we have the Badlands trim. That is the next one up from Outer Banks. Obviously, you can see that there is definitely a lot of pricing overlap between the base trim and the next trim up with options or without options, etc. $47,395 gets you the Badlands trim. This gets you a different front suspension with sway bar disconnect, which is definitely important, and Haas 2.0 with upgraded dampers. If we move up to the Wild Track model, $58,025 gets you the 2.7 liter standard. Sasquatch is also standard, as is the Haas 3.0 suspension. There are, again, a number of different suspensions available in the Bronco. This has the upgraded steering rack and tie rod ends. My bad for saying that the Sasquatch package included the upgraded steering rack. That's actually not true. That is only on the Wild Track and some of the upper end trims as well. But if you are planning on really abusing your vehicle, if you're planning on doing some desert running, etc., you're going to want those upgraded steering rack components. This also gives you trail one-pedal drive, which is kind of handy. And it operates just like it sounds. You just use the accelerator pedal, you take your foot off, the car comes to a stop. That's definitely kind of cool, but it does come across as a little bit lazy. But included with some of this is the trail turn assist option. If you're getting the 4-door model especially, I would highly recommend getting trail turn assist if you do plan on off-roading, because the turning radius is not exactly tiny on the Bronco. Then we have the Everglades trim, which is the one that was featured in this video, that adds the winch, the snorkel, etc. Fun fact, I ended up actually using the winch because the day after we filmed this video, it ended up snowing 4 inches, which doesn't sound like a great deal, but bearing in mind that I live in a forest that doesn't usually get snow, there were trees down absolutely everywhere, and we decided that it would be handier to use the winch on the Everglades Bronco to get the tree out of the way, so we could go get the tractor to get the rest of the tree out of the way. At any rate, that proved pretty handy, so even if you're not planning on doing off-roading, I kind of like the addition of a winch. The Heritage Limited is based on the Badlands trim. It's $69,195, and it's more expensive than some of these others, even though it's based on a lower-end trim, because it has a lot of the options that are standard, rather, on the Heritage Limited that are options on the other trims. Then, of course, we get the Raptor trim, which is the ultimate bonkers, and will get you up to about $100,000 out the door if you check all of those little option boxes. Now we have to address the question, how does this stack up against the Wrangler? Most specifically, the 2024 Wrangler, which has been refreshed. The first thing you'll notice when you park a Bronco and a Wrangler next to one another is that the Wrangler is a little bit smaller, and there are pros and cons to this. The interior feels a little less roomy, especially now that the Wrangler gets standard side curtain airbags. That's something that it didn't get before, but their addition has actually reduced the amount of room you get between the side of your head and the sills and the frame of the vehicle, etc. up above. The Wrangler has a few things that we don't see in the Bronco, for better or worse, depending on how you look at it. We have the solid front axle, we have the windshield that folds down, two key things that you won't find on the Bronco. Taking the doors off, I find a little bit easier on the Wrangler than on the Bronco, but then there's the question of what do I do with the side view mirrors? That is more elegantly handled on the Ford because they're just attached to the body. So Ford seems to have spent a little bit more time on some of those more nuanced details. The lack of a solid front axle in the Bronco is a bit of a bummer if you really want to do a lot of lifting or you want to take your vehicle really crazy off-road, but there are a wide variety of aftermarket solid front axle swap kits available for the Bronco. So if you want to do that yourself, you can do that, but you could get a solid axle on the Wrangler right from the factory. The downside for the Wrangler is, of course, on-road driving dynamics. It's just not as good to drive on-road as the Bronco. That's what the independent front suspension gets you. Now, on the odd twist, we now have full float axles available in the Wrangler. So if you plan on doing a massive lift, you want to put really big tires on your Wrangler, or you're doing a lot of heavy weights back there, a lot of heavy payload, a lot of towing. Towing did go up for 2024. Then you're probably going to want the full float axles in the Wrangler. That has been a bit of a complaint for the Bronco. Those are not available from the factory, although there are obviously upgrade kits available. On the drivetrain front, Jeep did not really change the lineup. We still have the 3.6-liter V6. That's the only way to get the manual transmission. We have a 2-liter turbo. We have a 2-liter turbo with a plug-in hybrid system. Weirdly enough, this is actually accounting for about a quarter to 30% of all Wrangler sales in the United States. It's probably going to be about 1/3 of Wrangler volume coming next year. Jeep has been going gangbusters with that plug-in hybrid system, and it does qualify for some portion of the federal tax credit even after the changes that happened on April 18th. There's also the 6.4-liter V8 engine available. If you would like a Wrangler with a really heavy engine up front, it's kind of like a boat anchor in terms of driving dynamics, but sounds absolutely fantastic and is thoroughly bonkers, that is still available. You can get that in the Rubicon as well. There's also an option for an 8,000-pound Warn winch this year and a 100-to-1 crawl ratio as well, depending on the version that you get. As far as competition goes, I would say that these two are very, very well aligned. Clearly, there is a lot of overlap in terms of the capability, the pricing, the feature set, etc. If you want a V8 engine or you want a naturally aspirated V6 for its simplicity, you're going to find those in the Wrangler. If you want more power standard, I really love the 2.3-liter turbo, and the 2.7-liter turbo is fantastic. Those happen in the Bronco. I also really like the gear ratios available in that 10-speed. It's not as smooth as the ZF 8-speed that we find in the Wrangler, but it has more gear ratios, and I really like that feel when towing or when out on the trail. Obviously, out on the trail, there is going to be some difference in the way these two vehicles behave and the way they feel with the solid axle versus the independent front suspension. The reality, of course, is that 80-90% of shoppers for Bronco and Wrangler are going to spend more of their time on-road than off-road. And if that is you, then Bronco is going to be the better daily driver. Wrangler, on the other hand, can be more capable as far as factory configurations go, but this is where it gets really sticky. You just can't make a blanket statement saying Wrangler is better off-road than Bronco or Bronco is better off-road than Wrangler because so many other factors come into it. What kind of modifications have you done? Have you lifted it? Have you swapped the tires? Have you done this? Have you done that, etc.? These are two very evenly matched vehicles, and thanks to some of the luxury creature comforts that we finally see in the Wrangler, like that larger LCD larger LCD infotainment system, because the LCD cluster is actually about the same size, power seats finally available, we have side curtain airbags available, etc. They've really brought the feature parity up to where we see the Bronco. but they have some of those other more rugged off-road features that some folks might like, standard from the factory, so you don't have to swap them in aftermarket. All that said, I'm really torn. I don't know which one I would buy. If I were daily driving, I would probably lean towards Bronco. I also like the look a little bit more with the new grille in the 2024 Wrangler. I'm not quite sure about it yet. But if I were really spending a bit more time on the trail, I would probably lean towards the Wrangler, especially if you want something that's smaller on the trail, a little bit more nimble feeling, etc. I would go towards the Wrangler. And of course, if you want the plug-in hybrid, it's the only show in town. Let me know what you think about that, and what would you pick if you were shopping in this segment, especially if you were looking to spend, what was my total here, about $61,500 on that Outer Banks model. If you were looking to spend about $60,000, which would you select? And are features like the fold-down windshield of importance to you, or do they not matter at all? I know most folks that have Wranglers around where I do very rarely take even their doors off, so that is a little bit tricky. Anyway, let me know all that down there in the comment section, and of course stay tuned because we'll have even more content on the 2024 Wrangler coming up very soon. See all of you later.